Thank you all for coming and welcome. This is the second of a new lecture series that we have called ROSKI Talks here at the Roski School of Fine Arts. Roski School of Art and Design. We changed our name a couple weeks ago, so yeah, that was bad. We are delighted and very honored to have Thomas Struth here with us today. And I just wanted to let you know that we will be having a series of talks that will be mostly Tuesday nights, and they will be around ideas of fine art, design, and fashion. So please keep a lookout for other talks that are upcoming. Tuesday nights at 7 will be when we're scheduling these. We have a couple of them that are upcoming. Deborah Sussman on March 4th. And I should have brought the others in front of me, so I'm sorry not to have them. But check this website, and you will get all that information right away. I also want to just mention to you all that we will have refreshments right outside immediately after the talk. So please plan to spend a few minutes and say hello to your friends. That would be lovely. I'd like to introduce John Tain, who's going to be in conversation with Thomas tonight. And John is, we're very proud to say he's a faculty member in our MA program in art and curatorial practice in the public sphere. And he's also a curator at the Getty Research Institute. And we're very pleased that he's here with us tonight to engage in this conversation. So John, if you'd like to do the rest of the introduction and start the event. Thank you all for being here. We're very excited to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. So I'm happy that you're all here today, and I will just give a brief introduction to Thomas, and then afterwards we'll both come on stage and have our conversation about the work. Since the 1990s, Thomas Struth has been one of the best-known artists. Consciously or unconsciously, we have all seen his work, and his eerily calm landscapes, hallucinatory and hallucinatorily precise, have affected the way that we think about the urban landscape, as his dispassionate studies of museums and their audiences have affected our understanding of the spaces of exhibition. He is a key representative of the contemporary German art scene, and also what has come to be known as a Dusseldorf School of Photography, as it was at the Kunstakademie there in the 1970s that he developed his passion for photography, studying first with Gerhard Richter before working primarily with Bernd and Hilla Beck. Struth's practice has been remarkably productive, with inclusion in numerous group exhibitions, including Documenta and the Venice Biennale. His first solo exhibition took place at PS1 in New York in 1978, and many have followed since, with the more recent one-person outings at the Dallas Museum of Art, MoCA here in 2002, and a major traveling retrospective in 2010-2012 that went to the Museu Saravis in Portugal, the K20 Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen in Düsseldorf, the Whitechapel Gallery in London, and the Kunsthaus Zurich. He is the winner of the Spectrum International Prize for Photography of the Foundation of Lower Saxony, and the Werner Mantz Proze for Photography, the Netherlands, 1992. He is currently an artist in residence at the Villa Aurora here in Los Angeles, where he will be exploring settings of technology, science, and media. We are very honored to have him here tonight with us. Please join me in welcoming Thomas Struth.
Yeah, we speak. We just, I'm here with my wife and our little son, who's 3.5 years old, since December 7th. And Los Angeles was a city that, just to say a few words in the beginning, that is, the few times I've been here before, it always seemed to me rather alienating, because previously in my life I preferred cities like London or Paris or Tokyo or Naples, Italy, that are very chaotic and very densely urban. So to be in Los Angeles each time was a bit strange for me. And actually yesterday I was discussing that in a small circle of friends, and during my experience here, I all of a sudden, driving around yesterday, I realized what the problem for me is with Los Angeles. No. Okay. That is that Los Angeles is a city of individualism, as maybe in general the American society, and you see an incredible amount of individual solutions of buildings, homes, shops, workshops, garages, the plantations that are in the front lawn of buildings, and that is very. It's very interesting, very entertaining, and would actually call for walking around in the city. But as you all experience every day, hardly anybody walks in the city here. So this is two very contradictory elements I find, which are on one hand a seductive element, and on the other hand it's a passing element that is, at least for me, is a bit seems to be like an unsolvable problem. So, just as the introduction for this talk. Like a few months ago, when I was invited to this talk, I thought maybe it's better for me, or it's more interesting to have a conversation, and I'm glad and thankful that you were willing and interested in accepting this format. For my part, I decided to do something which I've never done before. I put together about 100 pictures, so it's quite a lot. From my so-called career, but what I did this time, I turned the chronology upside down. So I start with the newest work that is right now on exhibition at Marion Goodman Gallery in New York, with where I work since 1989, and then I start to show my work backwards to and show the earliest work at the end. I've never done that, and maybe it will be a bit hurdly. So it's an experiment.
Yeah. Well, I thought that it might kind of be interesting to show people here, the work that is on view right now in the Marion Goodman Gallery, because they might not necessarily have the opportunity to see it, and then this will kind of give people a sense of what's on your mind, or what you're kind of thinking of, or what you have recently been thinking of. And one of the things that was really fascinating about this body of work that's on view is that there's something very uncanny about them. And you talked about being in LA since December here, but in fact a large section of these photographs were shot when you were last here in Southern California last year in 2013, and that's a set of 5 photographs of Los Angeles that were taken last year, right? Of Disneyland, various photographs of Disneyland.
Yes, I mean to say something in general before is that for me, what can I say? My mode of working is mainly, let's say, to make a picture, to make an artwork, you have to have a reason. And when photography or I would say also film is your medium, then the reason has to come first, and then you materialize it. You use your tools, and you try to and whilst you use the tools, you might eventually change some of the ideas or refine it, and you work a lot on editing your thoughts, and then eventually editing or the pictures or the artwork to come to the narrative that you were thinking about. So the reasoning comes from both, I would say, heart and soul. It comes from observation of what is going on around you, which can be a very private thing, which can also be a very global thing. It can be a very political thing, which is in my opinion, inevitable also, because when you reflect, when you analyze your narrative and make a statement of how to present it and what to say about it, you also take position. You like the Malevich black square is taking a position at the time. It's a design. It's a design thing, but it also takes a very specific position during the time. So this reasoning, that's accumulating, or that I'm working on, that's the most difficult part in a way, because for every show, for example, when I had my opening at Marion Goodman on January 10, it was the result of a long period of time working on it and thinking about these combinations and whether it makes sense or not. I work with a model at my studio. I have a maquette of the gallery that's 1 to 20, so it's fairly big, and I tested with small photographs that I print out and where I work on the installation and the selection, how many pictures I need, and in which way they could be installed, maybe. Losing the trail. So after the opening, the next morning I wake up, I look into the mirror, I'm thinking, what next? Like next exhibition in 2 or 3 years is coming up, or what is? So the work is mainly finding or determining the narrative that's important for me or important enough to work on, and then materializing it. So my relationship with Marion Goodman and the gallery in New York is such that I decided maybe 10, 12 years ago, before that I would always test new work somewhere else to see whether it works, like in Japan or somewhere when there's not so many people see it. And then I decided, no, from now on I will always present the new work in New York for the first time, because it gets the biggest audience, and it's also risky and how can I say, it's an important place for critical narrative.
Yeah, and I mean, that immediately came across, and I'm glad you have this kind of panoramic installation shot, because from this you can get a sense of what the exhibition was like. When you first come into the gallery, you see that photograph, or at least I first saw that photograph of Matterhorn, right? And I think part of what you were interested in was precisely this kind of Disney and his impressions of Europe, and this kind of recreation of Europe within the format of the amusement park. But what was interesting was that you have these photographs of the kind of the make-believe of Disneyland, but then they're juxtaposed with these photographs from a kind of slightly earlier moment when you were taking photographs of high-tech industry and places of labor. And what this very uncanny thing starts happening, where the two sets of photographs start kind of affecting each other. So the Disney photographs start making the places of labor seem like sets or make-believe places themselves, like somehow, maybe it's because they're empty of people, they seem somehow as if they're places for people to then go in and act out the kind of like labor as itself. And then in the kind of later areas of the exhibition, this is one of the first ones. This one I think is Georgia Tech, right?
It's Georgia Tech. This is a robotics laboratory where they try to program they will work on the programming of robots. For example, in this case, this machine in the foreground here is something where they test the forward movement and the stopping of a robotic object. But what interests, I mean, in principle, I have to make a few branches. I think my work is, even though I'm not sometimes aware of that in the beginning, but when I look back now, it seems to me that my work is all the different bodies of work. They're always about, in principle, different aspects of the human condition. For example, the street pictures were about the expression of the communal unconscious energy that is embodied in the architecture. The family portraits, they are, of course, about the inevitable family situations, which are kind of without which we wouldn't exist. So try to in a rather conventional pictorial manner to work on this. The museum pictures were started out of a curiosity questions around identification of identity through memory. And how it is embedded in artworks. The Paradise pictures were mostly about, some about meditation and a fantasy, of stillness and silence. And then after that, I got interested in these places of technology and science, which we called in the studio amongst my assistants and me, Nature and Politics series, because just as a kind of a slightly ironic title. Then when after I exhibited these 4 years ago in New York and then in other places, I knew I was still interested in science and technology, but it would be, I didn't want to make it a huge body of work that is just a variation of what I showed 4 years ago. So I was asking myself, what do I like? How can I make it a more general narrative and talk about a more general aspect of the contemporary world? And at the same time, I read an article about Disney in a German paper, which was in 2008, so that's now 6 years ago, that intrigued me, and because it was about the changing perspective that we, or she was a German filmmaker, so I think maybe from a perspective of a German filmmaker, onto Disney now compared with maybe in the late 60s or early 70s, when Disney was maybe representative of all the sort of infantilized and negative aspects of America from the European perspective. And the article explained or claimed and stated the opinion that that's not the case anymore, for several reasons, which partly I didn't agree, but it seemed to me all of a sudden, when I looked at the photograph that accompanied the article, that that indeed Disney seems rather archaic in terms of image and fantasy production in that has materialized in the 3D environment compared to today's movie possibilities, where you see Harry Potter or Elysium or Her, like in every movie, the construction possibilities are endless. That can be done with computer. So Disney seems really like an almost a dinosaur method in that respect. And so I thought maybe it's interesting to go back to Disney with the means of photography, and talk about, you try to, how can I say, to slice in with the camera into this ambiguity of memory of another place that somebody has seen, and its recreation and presentation in front of the eyes of other people who might have similar associations. So it's all about the question of reality, memory, imagination, future fantasy, which in a way was also an interest I had when I look at the science and technology places, because I didn't look at them as a knowledgeable specialist in any one of these fields, but just as a big antenna which picks up the, how can I say, the energy and the phenomenological expression of these places.
Yeah, interesting is that they're so kind of detailed in terms of the photographs and so specific to each of the places. These photographs, but also the Disney photographs. And I thought was interesting about the Disney photographs is that you don't actually specify that it's Disneyland. You just say it's, Pond or Cinema, Anaheim, California. But then it somehow kind of becomes immediately clear that you're looking at an amusement park. But what then happens is it's interesting that you say that you saw the article in 2008, and then I think you actually went to Disneyland the following year, right, for the first time.
Yes, I did. I read the article and felt maybe that's an interesting idea, but then I thought, oh, maybe that's stupid, so I put the article away in my archive. And then a year later, when I was in New York, I thought, oh, maybe I should just go for a few days to Disneyland to make some test shots and see whether all that's interesting or not. And then I did. And actually, from the 6 pictures I have from Disneyland, on this show, there's one small detailed picture of fake rocks with real plants that remained, that survived the time, so I used it. But then it rested, for a few years, and I was still not sure whether I should do it or not, until I was bit more into the science and technology pictures, and I wanted to have as I described before, I wanted to have a counterpart for these works, and I decided to go for real with 2 assistants and work on it with my real cameras.
Yeah, it's kind of. I think that kind of move, it becomes very apparent in the exhibition itself that there is this kind of thinking through the whole entire exhibition. It's not just a kind of a set of unrelated photographs. There's this kind of very careful kind of choreography of how the different photographs work together, and there's this mounting sense of irreality or the increasing sense of fantasy of the scene. So that the photograph that you mentioned of the rocks with the plants, somehow even by the time that's Matterhorn. And this one, even somehow, and by the time I got to this photograph, I had to kind of ask myself, oh, are these really plants, or are they, are they fake plants, are they real plants? The boundary between reality and fiction becomes very porous.
I think that as an artist, you have the good opportunity to accumulate things as a witness, and then they feed into your. For example, you could also, a few years ago when we were watching the American campaign with the Sarah Palin, you could ask yourself, is that reality, or it seemed so so nightmarish in a way that and there's a strange the question the question is, will there be divide between the real contact and your reality of your physical interaction between people, or in which ways Facebook, Twitter, and all your kind of digital communication, in which way will that influence your daily life with our families or friends, or the actual community we live in. So in a way, wondering about what will happen in the future as we live in these times, that's kind of embedded for me in this. And there's a certain there's a lot of joy in there, but there's also a certain amount of wondering and anxiety in there, and sort of you're testing with the means of photography, and that's all. That's only reasoning for me to do my work. I'm a picture maker. I love to make pictures. I love to work with pictures, and I'm very, how can I say, I'm very to work on the show and on the ingredients and how they're presented. That's extremely important for me, because it changes a lot when you hang two pictures like that, or you have 5 pictures in a room, like in the beginning. The way they're organized is very important for the development of the content. It's like a piece of music. You cannot take like the third part of a symphony and put it first, and if you mix it up, it's not the same thing anymore.
Well, and so speaking of that, I was wondering if you could. Oh yeah, like.
Right, I go back.
Okay, yeah.
Over here. So that's a picture I made in St. Petersburg in 2006 of just the courtyard with graffiti, and there was also unusual in this show that I used some pictures that were not so recent, but which I didn't publish yet. And also I was, for a long time, I thought maybe between the Disney pictures and the science and technology pictures, the new ones, I need a third body of work or third element in the show. And I had one picture that I showed later that you saw already briefly, which is of a medical operation that is performed with a Da Vinci a remote surgery robot. That's kind of a third element. But then I quite at the end of my thoughts before the show, I decided to introduce these 2 architecture photographs as a third element in the show. This one and this one from Ulsan in South Korea.
And within the context of this exhibition, this almost seems like it was like a toy set. I mean, it didn't kind of look like it was of a city. And and one of the things I really liked, one of the details was that, so I think the title of this is the Latte Hotel, right?
Yeah.
But in the background, if you look back there, written in the Chinese characters is the word for now, or the present. And so there's this kind of all these buildings are emblazoned with the word the present.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's kind of really interesting. I was wondering maybe if we could go forward to the surgery one, because that one was so fascinating. I mean, I couldn't quite, when I first saw this, I couldn't quite understand what it is that we were seeing, and it was only kind of in thinking about it that I think that there's a person being operated on, right, in this photograph.
That's true, yeah.
And there's actually a nurse or a technician in the background,
yeah, that's right.
But you don't. that's not what gets foregrounded. And so almost, what we're seeing is just this kind of the shininess of the plastic that wraps up this machinery, and it almost seems like it's a picture that's empty of human presence, but there's actually two people at least in the photograph, and that was kind of really fascinating, the way that kind of you've managed to almost make them disappear from the photograph, in some ways.
Well, I think it's always a question of the presence of the human body in my pictures. I mean, the street pictures, it needed the absence of the body to show that the street itself and the buildings is a human creation and represents the mentality of the Neapolitans and let's say, or the mentality of a certain aspect of a British sculpture or the German post-war situation. And of course, family portraits, museum pictures, one doesn't have to talk about. But in science and technology, it's the same thing. It needs kind of the absence of the human body to look at it as something that was created by us, one could say. And here, this photograph came about because since we moved to Berlin 5 years ago, I thought I want to do something in the city I live in, and I've never done anything in the science field with medical. So, and in Berlin there's a rather famous big hospital called Charité, and we researched whether there might be something interesting, and it came out that this called Da Vinci remote surgery is an American product. This machine is being used in prostate operations, and I went to look at the machine. The machine looked boring, and I asked the surgeon, would it be at all possible to be present at an operation? Because I thought maybe that's more interesting, and it was a strange step to go across that hurdle to be in the operating room while somebody's actually being operated on. But I did, and I found it utterly interesting, and saw the possibility of making a picture that's a little bit like a memento mori. So it's the body of which you don't see very much.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that you see is that thing sticking out of the body, that red.
Yeah.
Kind of. And
then for a few times, I went maybe 3 times to find out about the problems of the composition, and to know what do I want and what does it need in terms of the cropping. And I tried for a long time to photograph practically almost the same frame with the second nurse who stands between the camera and the patient. And then I realized I made a few pictures when she stepped away, and then they talk with each other, and sometimes they talk about a party, like the surgeon and some of the assistants talk about something else, just to relax the tension during the operation. And I think the more complicated the operation gets, the more it happens that they talk about something else, just to not get too tense. And of course, one condition was that I needed to have a release from the respective patient that I was photographing, at whose operation I was photographing, that he would agree to be photographed.
Yeah.
And but of course I could not during the operation tell the nurse, could you move these scissors? So it was all more as happenstance. So that's why it took several occasions to have. Maybe in one of the next lectures I should show some other unsuccessful versions of this picture to make you understand how complicated that is, because the angle, the angle of the lens, the angle how much you at what angle you look on the surface of the table and how the instruments are there, that matters very much and changes the picture a lot. So I mean, the actual picture is maybe this big. It's not very big. That's one of the first digital photographs I made, like with a digital camera, and the print is an inkjet print. And sometimes I did some digital printing, but mostly the shots were made with 8x10 or 5x7, and then sometimes I just make a print, normal analog, and sometimes in recent years I scan the negative, and then I work, because then I can work on the print and the picture much better.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this is kind of, the reason why I asked about the kind of the working with the hospital is because it seems like for this entire series, there was, except maybe with the photograph from St. Petersburg and the Ulsan photograph, I mean, they all were kind of in these private spaces, that are in the outdoors. Maybe even in the outdoor ones, the Disneyland ones, they still require the permission of Disneyland to take these photographs. And so what's interesting is that, you have these photographs that are void of human presence, but there's a lot of kind of talking and kind of negotiation and discussion with various parties that are involved in the creation of these works, and that's actually kind of like the hidden aspect of your work. I feel like
I mean, sometimes like I'm a very what can I say, like when I have an idea or like I want to achieve something, I don't lose track very easily. So, for example, the Ulsan picture actually started when I was in Japan the first time in 1986. I flew back via Seoul, and then I had a maybe 9-hour stopover. So Korean Airlines offered a tour of the city at the time, and I saw these apartment blocks with these big numbers on the sides, and I thought this is a very interesting thing to photograph one day. But then I never came to Korea until 23 years later. Then when I was there, before I went, I thought I want to make a picture of apartment blocks. But then I had to go to many locations and do a lot of scouting in a way to come to that picture, which is almost like a nightmarish, apocalyptic version of how you can go in a beautiful landscape with the building of these apartment block towers. I think maybe we should go a bit forward, otherwise.
Yeah, see, I mean, a photograph like this, I mean, it's so kind of interesting that we're looking at something which is like a machine, and it's like seems so real and seems so heavy, and there's this definite like mass, but yet the way that it's staged, and also I think the way that it's printed, because the photograph itself highlights the red and the green, the colors. Somehow it becomes almost like just this kind of theater setting, almost waiting for someone or something to show up.
Yeah, well, I think in principle, I remember that when I was a young adult, I had the feeling, okay, everything is a given.
Yeah.
What you see outside, the street you walk in, the buildings you see, the roads you drive on with your parents, everything is a given. But you can also change this totally around and look at everything as having been created, and it doesn't have to be like that. It could also be different. And when you're in Los Angeles, yesterday I do a few things here. I try to make some context. Yesterday I went to DreamWorks animation and got a tour there to find out whether there would be anything interesting to photograph, and it was 1 hour early, drove around a little bit in Glendale into the mountains, and I saw, like on a kind of in one of these canyons where there's nothing, like above the edge of where the houses go. Somebody bought a property that just sat on a ridge, and he built a villa there with a garden that was completely surrounded by this typical, I don't know whether there's a word for it, either dry, rocky slopes with a dry planting. So it was a very peculiar image of one person's or one family's dream sitting there on that ridge in the middle of the dusty environment. That's really hilarious. So it's just an example of, and I think Los Angeles is a city where I can see that a lot.
So are you going to go photograph that house? Or?
Well, I did it, a few pictures. I don't think it will hold, my your criticism in terms of a valuable picture for me, but it was interesting.
And so this one, it's been a long time since I've been to Disneyland, so I don't even recognize what is this? What ride is this? Do you remember? Or?
This is inside the Indiana Jones ride. I mean, it was when I was there. I think the pond and some of the other pictures are more interesting for me. But when I'm there, I also thought I have to. The Matterhorn in this picture is really like Disney, and maybe it has to do with when I was a child, we went a lot, not a lot, but now and then, to one of these fair grounds where I went on a so-called ghost ride, and it reminded me of that, and I wanted to include that.
And was that the normal lighting, or was that, how did the...
Well, I mean, this is, I did 2 photographs, this one and one of a cinema screen in a different ride I did at night.
Yeah.
Because during the day there's the ride, you cannot walk inside. And it was a long period of negotiations until they allowed me to do that. And the exposure is very long, and this seems much brighter in the photograph than it normally is there. This is again at Georgia Tech. This is a table in a working area where they work on the development of these mini helicopters and drones and mini submarines that are used to go into toxic environment. For example, in Fukushima, and partly also for spying. And when I came to that, this dinosaur toy on the table as well, and it was a good opportunity.
So this one was the cinema, right? It doesn't. At first, I didn't even recognize what it was. It just kind of seemed like this huge, giant, parabola or something like that. And then I saw that the seats were on the side, but it's kind of fascinating. The titling was important for me to reduce the title to a more general word, like cinema or ride and pond, because I didn't want to entitle it with the rides that I'm depicting, because that's not what I was interested in. So that's in the rides soaring over California, where the audience sits in these metal benches, and they're being lifted up into the middle of the screen, and what you see is a helicopter ride over the different landscapes in California, and the seats, the benches move and shake while you fly over the landscape. And on 3 occasions they spray the different scents from above the seats,
one is a pine, pine scent for when you fly over the forest. One is a like salty air breeze when you fly over the ocean, and the third one I forgot. So the movie was made before HD, so it's a bit of a archaic feel, not so successful.
Did you go on the ride?
Yes, I did.
And then, did you have to wait after the park was closed to take these photographs?
Yes, yeah. Okay. This one and the Indiana Jones ride photograph I made at night. This is the detail we saw. This is entitled Canyon, even though the ride is called Cars. And I just thought it's maybe that one and the pond are the best. Works in a certain way because they almost look like a real canyon through the photograph and the cropping and then the framing I made. And even in the exhibition in New York, sometimes some of the people come in and they ask, what canyon is that? Before they see the track there. And
yeah, it is very convincing. I mean, the canyon effect.
Okay, here's some examples of the other nature and politics photographs I made since between 2008 and yes, still ongoing. This is a part of a experimental setup of a plasma fusion reactor. This is some of the cabling that's required outside. This is a space shuttle Endeavour, and I'm standing underneath in a situation where they were working on the replacement and the repair of the heat tiles,
which I guess is now across the street, right? The space shuttle. Yeah, so
could be.
Can go over after and check it out. So.
For me, that was an important picture because I mean, here you don't see it because of the lack of resolution. But the heat tiles, they look extremely self-baked. They really look like they had been made in a kind of amateur pottery workshop, which was really astonishing that the whole space shuttle looks so compared to the promise of modernity that it represents, and so science fiction, it looks really utterly hand knitted.
Artisanal space shuttles.
Exactly, yeah. It's really interesting. So the nature and politics series or body of work came about after I had concluded the museum pictures, which I did between 1989 and 2005. So for quite a long time. And the Prado had been a museum where I had wanted to photograph for a long time. But I don't know, for several reasons, it took a very long time to do it. And there was something unusual I did here. In the beginning when I worked there, for the first 2 days, I realized that I was about to attempt to imitate myself, like you make replicas of my earlier museum photographs, and then I thought I cannot do that. That doesn't make sense. So I decided to put the 8x10 camera on wheels, and I was allowed to install flash heads in the skylight at the Prado because the director was very friendly. Had a very friendly attitude towards my endeavor, and so I installed 20 flash heads in 3 different rooms. so which enabled me to work quite spontaneously and move the 8x10 camera very quickly from location to location when I saw something, and set the focus and put the tripod down with the pedal in the middle of that construction, and then shoot. So that's why some of these pictures look more casual in a way than the earlier ones. And these are just two of my favorite pictures from that group.
How much time do you spend in the gallery itself, before you start taking photos, or do you start taking photos right away? I mean, is it a process?
No, I mean, I was, what can I say, the Prado. I had a meeting with the director, I don't know, 3 months before that, and then was a very big logistics preparation with the equipment, and then we came to Madrid, I don't know, maybe on a Friday or Thursday, and put the flashettes on the weekend, and then I worked from Monday, Monday through Saturday, during the entire opening hours of the gallery, from 9 till 5 or 6 or so.
Yeah, so there's a lot of time.
Yeah, well, at the time, I mean, I did everything with 8x10. I exposed maybe 300 plates, which,
takes a while, yeah.
Yeah. There was also an interesting move I made, which by cropping the painting, Las Meninas, and thus somehow bring the figures in the painting even closer to the audience than I'd done before. This is another. This is kind of the second small body of works I made that showed just the audience. I made this in 2 locations at the Academy Gallery in Florence, where people look at the David sculpture of Michelangelo, and these pictures are from the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, and the people look at a small Leonardo painting, Madonna and Child. These two are the Prado, and these 2 locations are the only times in all my work that I used flash support, because the exposures would have been too long. And also, as you can see in the Prado pictures and in this one, other than in the David, in the pictures from Florence, that at this time it started that people walk towards an artwork and immediately raise their cell phone and make a photograph, and then they go away. So they don't. It's a very dominant habit now, which is a kind of booty attitude. So people come there and they feel they don't. I mean, I think there's many reasons for that, but it seems to be predominantly that people cannot. You deal with the fact that maybe you don't know enough, or they feel intimidated by the fame or the beauty of the artwork, and you just want to capture it and take it home to eventually deal with it later, or show to other people the proof that they've been there. I don't know why. I do that sometimes. I make pictures of things I see in museums after I looked at them, because I collect them, from my archive, and just to remind me of important things I've seen. In these 2 cases of the pictures at the Hermitage and the photographs in Florence, for the first time I presented them as a frieze.
And in this series, were the people aware that the camera was there?
Yeah, I mean, the people were aware that the Leonardo painting attitude than it had been before. And then this photograph I made in 2001 when somebody in New York said to me, why don't you go to the Vermeer show in London at the National Gallery? That would be a good opportunity for another picture. I thought, Vermeer, okay. So I went and I made only one picture with nobody in it, which at the end came out to be the interesting one.
This is the jungle series, though.
Yeah, I called this new Pictures of Paradise. Yeah. And these pictures I started in '98, and I made, I think, 35 different pictures within 10 years or almost. That's maybe the only body of work that I made that was a very intuitive idea, and I didn't know how to justify them. There was no immediate social or kind of historical complex for me, and that came only later when I started to exhibit them, and I realized when I in this exhibition tour you mentioned before that I had some 12 years ago in America, I usually showed these in one room where there were 5 or 6 pictures of just around. Exclusively, these pictures would fill an entire room, maybe 6 or 7 of them, and I realized that what the effect that had was I'd call it no thinking.
No thinking.
No, because this is clear. You see jungle, and there's nothing to. It doesn't need any. It doesn't evoke any search, intellectual search, and I found that an interesting place because thought tends to be to go in circles, like unless you have a new idea or you step out of your circle.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about this is that even in some of your, kind of architectural photographs, there's not necessarily a foreground, or the foreground is kind of empty. But in these, it's like everything is just kind of background in some ways. It's just pushed up,
Yeah, I mean, it came. I think the development of that idea came because at the time I lived in Düsseldorf on the ground floor of a building, and I had a terrace, like on a balcony in the back, and the courtyard was filled with trees. So I was sitting often, having breakfast or dinner or lunch or reading the paper on this balcony and looking into the structure, and I thought and the idea started to build up that it would be interesting to make pictures, that the group of pictures that are so densely inhabited with detail that you give up wanting to read the entire picture. That was, and particularly what I had imagined in the beginning. So was something like this. And then as I went along, I made some other pictures that are not like that. But in principle, that's what I had imagined in the very beginning. And I did over a period of 10 years. I researched where interesting forests are. That I would either go to specifically to make the pictures, or I would go. I would be in Japan, and I asked my Japanese gallerist, tell me 3 or 4 important forests in Japan, and this one is on the island of Yakushima. It's in Germany. It's in Brazil, in China, and in Florida. Then the museum photographs you led me soon into the idea to look at some interiors where artworks are presented that were specifically made for these places and are still in the same location. So that was one of the reasons for the Pantheon, and also places of gathering of religious reason. That's in Venice. That's a painting by Giovanni Bellini that was made for this altar in I think 1498. This is an early Tizian painting that he did when he was 24 years old in the Frari church in Venice. So in a way, there's a combination of architecture, my interest in architecture, and my interest in a historical representation of and advertising for causes like religion, which evoke a figurative depiction of human body. That's the Milan Cathedral facade, and that's Notre Dame. Yes. Then I made a small group of works at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, for which I staged the scenes. Normally the museum pictures are all waited for, so I wait for the right configuration of people, with the exception of the Pantheon. The photograph was a staged set, and the Pergamon pictures are staged because the exposure was too long to work with the real people. So in this case, I made this test here with a couple of friends after my third attempt to work with the casual museum visitors at the time, and they all failed. And then the question was, shall I assemble like 150 people for the big space where the Pergamon altar is? And I decided to do it, and that's the result.
Wait, so this is a posed one as well?
Yeah, it's a posed, yeah. But there was a big thing with catering and 10 assistants and walkie-talkies and stuff like that. And
did you specifically place each person, or was it more like you were looking through the viewfinder and kind of wanted a kind of a certain spread? Or
no, I did from all the plates that I had before in the contact sheets. I developed the two different possible solutions, and I made large drawings. And before we started, I had a meeting with everybody where I explained the two options that I wanted to do. And then but I left it up to them, what they wanted to embody, what they wanted to do. And for example, these three guys, they were friends, and they decided to stand very close to the camera. And then I moved a few people, that the girl there with the short hair is my assistant, so I placed her there because there was a big gap. But then, just as we were about to start to make the exposures, the guy here who shows the stone to one of the visitors, he just came out. He's one of the archaeologists who worked there, and he just didn't know that we were working, and he just came out with the stone, started to talk to it's one of the extras, and I thought, this is perfect. And it was also interesting that the altar was under restoration at the time, and in the beginning I wanted to exclude the scaffolding here on the right, but then I thought it's interesting because it indicates that the whole scenery is a staged, it's a setup. It's not, it's like the Pergamon altar here is practically it's not turned upside down, but it's turned inside out, and it's and before what you see on the side here was at the end of that altar structure. So they just turned it around and turned it. He wrapped the room with it. This picture is a portrait of Giles Robertson, who was an art historian in Scotland, who was a specialist for Bellini and Mantegna. And when I met him through his son in 1985, I was very fascinated by their character and their incredible, what can I say? But the incredible kind of unbroken historical unbrokenness and unity with their life's history and their very strong connection with European history. So I asked him. He asked him, "Can I make a photograph of you and your wife?" And then 2 years later, I went back to Edinburgh to make the picture. And in this photograph, I noticed for the first time that the portraits in the background, and I'm making a portrait of a man today in this environment, and I thought that is an interesting, almost time tunnel situation that happens here, which somehow led me to the museum pictures. And I dealt a lot for a long time with the question of portraiture, because when I studied at the academy with the Bechers, very soon a new student came, was Thomas Struth, and actually I have to say that Axel Hütte, who was also one of my fellow students, he started with portraits to make portraits of our friends and colleagues at the academy. But the Thomas Struth made it more systematically. So I watched him making portraits, and I thought, that's not the way I would do it. So a few years later, like I left the academy in 1980, and then in 83, 84, I started slowly to make individual portraits, but I didn't. It took me a long time until I had one that I really liked. But then I thought this may be a bit too classical, and I forwarded a little bit. This is the Restorer picture, which was also like a pre-museum photograph picture. This is another one, and I just flipped through these a little bit quicker. I mean, these are also mostly or exclusively waited for. So I would stand there usually with a tripod, and you wait for sometimes 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, until, and then if there would be some connection with the narrative in the painting and the composition of the visitors, I would expose, because I wouldn't know exactly whether it's a good picture or not, and also I wouldn't know whether you would get something better or not. So I would expose as soon as there was something going on between my picture and that picture in my frame. So in the end, I have maybe 50 of that frame, but that's the one, and sometimes it was only 10, or it could have been 60 or 30. So in my archive, there's a lot of unsuccessful pictures. So that's one of the sons of that Scottish couple that I showed before. And I did for a while. I did a number of individual portraits. And for me, the main interest, or the one important goal was maximum presence of the person, maximum psychological presence. So when you photograph somebody, or like when you exist, any given moment of your physical presence is not like the next one. So it's always there's no equal moments. There's no every morning when you get up, you never feel exactly the same as in any other morning you woke up before or you wake up in the future. And that's the same thing with every given moment. So when you wait with the view camera and photograph somebody, there's a constant change in mood or presence of the person. And for me, it's interesting, like to capture something, a moment when the person is really in the room and not with his or her thoughts somewhere else. I mean, here that's maybe a bad example because she's not. I think she might have been looking at me. But then after a while, I was. I also did family portraits at the time, and in the meantime, I decided I'm not making pictures of individuals anymore because I find for me it's not so interesting.
And so this is the first one that you did, also in Scotland, right?
Exactly. That's the second one, and I worked. I think you wanted to ask me about the project I did with my friend Ingo Hartmann. Was a friend of mine who was a psychoanalyst, and he would work with patients. He would ask patients when a new patient came with a problem, and they had the first interviews. He would often ask them to bring a photograph from their family or of the family history, which would represent what the family life was like. So it could be big living room with a sofa and the young boy just alone sitting on the sofa, or it could be a group of like the father, an older father, 3 daughters, and a baby in one of their arms, and the whole group would kind of awkwardly laugh, and you would feel it's a strange, some kind of strange tension in the group or whatever. So we did, and he asked me. He said, for a long time I would like to make a photographic study of these photographs, and since he didn't have the means, and we met, and I was a photographer, he asked me would you be willing to make a cooperation. So we collected photographs like this from 40 or 50 people. I made reproductions of all of them and printed them in black and white in a small format so that they would become comparable, or you would allow some kind of reading.
Kind of like a typology almost.
Yeah, typology. And it was really utterly interesting and taught me a lot about photography. And then a few years later, I made these 2 first family photographs because I was a guest with these 2 families in 85 and 86. And when I saw them together on my desk at the studio, I thought this is incredibly interesting. And I decided to make that a new body of work. Which is still going on. I feel it's always a big challenge to photograph a family. It's much more complicated than anything else, but it's very interesting, and the more I get, the more interesting it gets. But I do them also very rarely. You know, maybe one a year, or sometimes 3 a year, and then 2 years none. So it's a very slow process.
That one was of Richter, just to...
Yeah, that's Richter. Yeah. It's one of the more recent ones that took 3 sittings, and the first 2 were not so good. And then I came up with this one. It's also a recent one.
Was this easy to arrange, or was this...
No. It was not. No, but I mean, that didn't come from my incentives. A National Portrait Gallery in London, they made an exhibition about the development of portraiture in the case of the Queen over 60 years of reign, and they wanted to commission a new double portrait of the Queen and Prince Philip. And I was at the studio one morning, and somebody called me and explained that to me, and said at the end, and we're thinking you would be the best candidate to do that. And I thought, I don't believe this. It's so bizarre. And so, but I said I need to think about it 3 days, and then I thought I can't. Yeah, it's too crazy to say no. But that was also a picture that I prepared very immaculately, because I knew I couldn't have lunch with them before, and you get accustomed to, like, you make myself comfortable with them. So it needed a long preparation.
Yeah. Because, I mean, from what I understand, your portraiture work is actually a very social experience where you spend quite a bit of time kind of not really even thinking about photography, right? I mean, this is at least Richard Sennett in his talking about your photography.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that I'm kind of an amateur psychologist. I mean, we determine where, like, so I think, okay, it could be good on that sofa, it could be good under these circumstances, and this frame, and if they don't object, we do it like that. Sometimes I make two different pictures, and then I trust that people reveal themselves in one way or another, which they usually do. Sometimes the situation, the psychological dynamic is kind of stuck, and they don't reveal anything, or somehow, it doesn't work out. Then there's two possibilities. Either I say, let's have a tea and chat a bit or say a tabula rasa and just find a new seat or find a new position, and it comes out. Sometimes it needs 3 sittings. But here in that case, I knew I wouldn't. I mean, I said before to the people who of the National Portrait Gallery, if it doesn't work out the first time, you need a second sitting, and it has to be. You're not a disaster if the first one doesn't work out, because sometimes it needs 2 or 3 sittings. And when Lucien Freud made this small painting of the Queen, I think he met her like 6 or 8 times. Yeah, so this is was my kind of the first group of works that I started with a small format camera in the mid-70s, and I say I grew up as a child of minimal and conceptual art. That was one of my main influences, and another influence was also the collection of the Museum Ludwig in Cologne, where I went to high school nearby Cologne, so I would usually go to the city, very often in the afternoon, and very often ended up in the museum, which housed the biggest collection of pop art in Germany at the time, but also works by Joseph Beuys and Paul Klee and Monet, and you back to, let's say, the 14th century. There was a very interesting school of looking at art for me. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I became very interested in photographing architecture, but in the beginning it was not actually an interest in the architecture, but it was more interest in denying composition, or making very deliberately repetitive composition or central perspective, which was inherently photographic composition, and just photograph streets. I made maybe 100 photographs of streets in Düsseldorf with a 35mm camera, regardless, more or less, what the composition in the frame was. And once I switched to photography and quit painting, the Bechers introduced me to working with a large format camera, and very soon I discovered, okay, it's important what's in the picture, and then I started to refine the location scouting and started to pay more attention what's atmospherically happening in the architecture. Mm-hmm. So this is in Düsseldorf in 79, in London 77, in Paris 1980, it's in Munich in 1980, it's in Cologne in, 79, I think, Edinburgh in Scotland, 85. In New York in 78. We have to say,
and for this one, you had received a scholarship or a grant to go to New York and spent half a year there. Was that?
Yeah, I was in New York in 70. It was in New York for 9 months when I was 23, between December 77 until September 78.
And at that moment, PS1 wasn't what it is today. It was actually a place where you could have a residency and kind of...
PS1 was a public school building, and it was just, I don't know how long before, I think in the beginning of the 70s, it was not a school anymore, and it was turned over into a artist studios place. In the academy in Düsseldorf, the circle of the friends and supporters of the academy, they decided to rent 2 studios at PS1 for several years, and give 2 students each 5,000 Deutschmarks for 6 months to go to New York and do whatever they wanted. And it was not connected with the school or anything. You just had the studio. The only thing you couldn't stay there, so you could just use it as a studio. You were not allowed to sleep there. And for me, it was something I couldn't use. I photographed streets, so I made my pictures and then made a show, like a self-organized exhibition there, and that was it. But the time in New York was a life-changing experience for me. I mean, New York is not anymore what it used to be like that during that time. It felt much more dangerous and threatening, actually. That was also an important step for me to go to Japan, because I'd never been in a country or a culture that was not formed by Christianity or Judaism. So in Japan, I was confronted with this kind of architecture, which seemed so what can I say, so not built to exist for a long time, but very. I made in 1979 while I was doing a commission for a communal Siedlungsgesellschaft, for what's it called in English? Yeah, co-op organization, that because I needed in my archive until a few years later, and I became for a while very interested in photographing ugly houses because they're omnipresent worldwide, but they don't have a voice. This is in Geneva, in Switzerland. I mean, that's not an ugly house, but it's things need a counterpoint. And then another life-changing experience was a 3-month stay in Naples, in Italy, which during which I met these restorers and spent a lot of time with them, looking at paintings from their perspective. And somehow it was you're kind of revisiting painting, and one has to understand that I started when I was 13 or 14 years old. I started to do a lot of drawings and paintings and gouache and watercolors and so forth, and it became pretty clear that I was you're going to do something with art, and I really loved painting. I mean, I really enjoyed painting very much. Just the smell and the colors and the almost erotic presence of the material, and so how can I say that? And it also was an important thing for me in retrospect, because it taught me a lot about composition and how the elements of a photograph or a picture create the meaning of the picture. In China, where I visited maybe 8 times between 95 and 2002, I sort of combined my experiences with museum photographs and waiting for specific configurations of people with the street photography, because in China it seemed kind of complete nonsense to wait for empty streets. So I turned it around and made kind of museum, not a museum photograph, but I waited specifically that, for example, here you see that all the different figures in the picture, even the driver in the car, are kind of separately visible, and I think that was a quite successful example for that technique. And also here I waited for very distinguished and specific locations of each figure in the photograph. And then I still do sometimes street photographs. That's a picture I made in Lima in 2005 in Peru. But not so. I think the street photography kind of slowly
diminishing.
It's diminishing because it's been my work for a very long time, and I'm just not so interested in it anymore. Even though here in LA, I might do a few, but it's just not so interesting for me anymore. Then for a while in the mid-90s or late 90s, in the 2000s, I made some bigger pictures that have to do with architecture, which are also more generic examples of places. this is also in Lima. This is in Dallas, Texas. With generic, I mean that they speak about a more principal phenomenon or expression of urban spaces. So this is Dallas, but it could also be in Chicago, or it could be elsewhere. This is in Tokyo. This is Las Vegas.
Of course.
This is Tiananmen. And I mean, you can see that what you said before about the ambiguous reality is kind of started almost here when you compare this with this. So it's maybe not funny, but
yeah.
This is in Norway, nearby Oslo, in a winter scene that is lit by greenhouses, which are lit around 24/7 to grow cucumbers and tomatoes in the winter, and then they make this strange futuristic landscape because of these light sources. This is El Capitan in Yosemite. This is in Hong Kong. That's a mobile art building that was commissioned by Chanel. Chanel commissioned Zaha Hadid to develop this mobile pavilion that was also in Central Park in New York and in Tokyo for a while. And when the crisis came in 2008, they just stored it somewhere. Oops. That's Times Square. It's also something I wanted to make. I thought a lot about Times Square for many years, and each time I was in New York, or a lot of times I went to Times Square, looked around, and tried to see a picture that I could make, but only when. And so for many years, it just came to the conclusion I cannot add anything of what exists already. So until one day I came to Times Square and they had done this building where the entire facade was a video screen, and I found that a really kind of new step in architecture and in our time. So I decided to go in the morning 2 or 3 times to try to make a picture. And when this, from all the negatives exposures I made, that one I liked particularly because of this slightly worried expression of the woman's face, which seems to say something about the bizarre presence of this kind of architectural environment. And that's a new picture that nobody has seen yet, except for people in my studio. This is underneath the Louvre, is an accelerator facility where they test the age of artwork by shooting protons on the sculpture or the painting, and they measure the reflection of the protons and determine the age and sometimes the region from where the material comes.
So it's like a sneak peek,
yes,
of the future. Well, thank you.